We've got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight. We've got three folks who have graciously volunteered to be our victims and answer our questions and talk to us about Spectre and Meltdown and the role software security plays in both preventing these sort of things in the future and mitigating the issues that are already known, and whatever else questions y'all feel like asking. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Justin Ferguson. I'm the chapter coordinator here in Kansas City. I assume since you're here you've probably heard of OWASP, but if you haven't, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. OWASP is a global organization dedicated to promoting and drawing attention to software security. We are an open source organization, vendor agnostic. We try not to give recommendations for specific vendors or anything like that. We try to share information. We promote software security through a number of means. Chapters like this one, which exist all over the world. Projects, which are tools and resources for developers to secure their software. And outreach. Conferences like AppSec EU and AppSec USA are the two big ones, as well as smaller local events and user groups. So, we may from time to time attend other user groups here in Kansas City to spread the gospel of OWASP. OWASP supports all aspects and participants of the secure software development lifecycle. Builders, developers, DevOps guys, breakers, InfoSec guys and QA guys, and defenders, DevOps and InfoSec and network security guys. We'll even talk to those network security guys. Our mission here in the Kansas City chapter of OWASP is, the mission statement's really long, but basically it says we're trying to bridge the gap between the security community and the development community. We're trying to be a common place because too often developers are scared to show up at security events and security guys don't want to show up at developer events, and so we're trying to be that middle ground. So, like I said, I'm Justin Ferguson. I'm the chapter leader. I'm easily reachable by numerous means. That's the quickest and easiest, but if you ever have anything that you'd like to see us do a talk on or anything like that, let me know, and I'm happy to find somebody who can talk more knowledgeably than I can on that topic. Our meetings are normally every fourth Tuesday of the month here at the Kauffman Foundation. We may move occasionally, but this is our normal location because it's free and is fairly nice for the price. So meetings are free to attend. We certainly appreciate it if you become a member of the OWASP Global Organization, because it does help fund our chapter if you put our name down when you buy your membership. But we mostly do this as a service and don't really have any expectations. We're easy to find. You can find us on any of website, mailing list.
Here for OWASP?
Yeah.
Twitter, etc., Facebook, LinkedIn. Generally, the mailing list, which you can get to from the website, is the best way to stay up to date. That's the first place I update whenever I update meetings. I generally try to update Facebook and Twitter, but I'm a little less reliable about actually updating the meetings on the website or updating LinkedIn because they're both kind of a pain. I try to do it, but So, few upcoming security events here in Kansas City that you may be interested in, or general security or not security. Hey, August. So February 7th is the ISC Squared Kansas City meeting. They're going to be talking about scoping and addressing vulnerabilities, also about Spectre and Meltdown. So should be a good talk. SAIC KC is February 13th. And they have a speaker speaking about Mimikatz and about attacking Active Directory, which should be really interesting if you're in an environment who has to use that. February 17th is DevFest KC. That's a Google-sponsored, very small developer conference that's going on at a event space downtown off of Baltimore.
I think last year, was that the one that was at the World War I?
I don't know. It's at someplace called Brass. Relatively new group that is trying to get their stuff in order. Kansas City Women in Security. They're doing a talk. They meet at Optiv. Well, their meeting is at Optiv.
She's giving that talk.
Oh, well, there you go. Glad to have you here.
Too.
This meeting coming up is at Optiv, I know, but I'm not sure. They move around their location.
Yeah, they have been looking at Fishtech, so.
February 27th is our next meeting, and August back here will be giving a talk on OWASP SAM and other software security assurance frameworks, which I'm looking forward to because that seems to be what I'm doing right now. So, and then, April, and then a little further out, April 20th and 21st, B-Sides KC, which looks like it should be a good event this year. They've actually expanded out into a day of training and a day of conference. So,
they moved it up a month, huh?
Yeah, they moved it up a little earlier too. And then May 9th is ISC Squared Secure World. And I don't remember where that was. I was just filling space on this slide. So that's just kind of some of the things upcoming in Kansas City. We've got a really great security and development community here in Kansas City, and there's always stuff going on that, I could probably find something I wanted to go about every other night of the week if my wife would let me out of the house. So I encourage you all to check out some of the other groups around here and get involved.
After a few more years of being married, it won't be a problem.
Yeah, probably once the kids have gotten a little older, then. So tonight we are doing a sort of roundtable panel on Spectre and Meltdown, which are two fairly major security vulnerabilities which came out beginning of this month, or were announced at the beginning of this month, not necessarily by
public
choice. And so I'm going to give a very brief background in case anybody's been living, under their desk for a few weeks and hasn't been kept up on it. But I am by no means a professional at hardware, that kind of kernel level stuff. So my explanation is going to be, so I'm going to dive right in. So we have 3 speakers tonight who are going to help us out with answering questions and talking more eloquently than I can, hopefully, about Meltdown and Spectre. We have John Mark Gurney, who is on the video here. John Mark works with me at New Context and is a FreeBSD developer, and also has worked historically with some of the folks who are listed on the paper about Meltdown. So he has a good resume. Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Well, I will get it so we can see you in just a moment. We also have Bill Clark, who is a solutions architect with the Fishtech group, and he's going to talk about some stuff. And Michael Owens, who just introduced himself over there with SAIC. So if you two gentlemen want to come hang out up here in the hot seats, we will see if we can get this going. There's like way too many windows going on here. There we go. Okay. So coming at us live from the Bay Area. So for those of you who, like I said, might have been living under your desk for a while, Spectre and Meltdown are both processor hardware level issues that result from the processor trying to predict what it's going to be doing next and not really having security in mind when it's doing it. That's sort of the high level. Maybe John Mark, you can give us a better, quick kind of rundown of the two issues and how they differ from each other.
Sure. One is Meltdown. That's the more interesting. It's the more egregious one, in my opinion, because of the fact that the processors have page tables with permission bits, and Intel specifically decided to ignore the permission bits when doing speculative execution. And so that's, sorry to step back a bit, but basically all of these are based upon the assumption of processors doing speculative execution, which is making a prediction about what should happen in the future and being wrong about that. And there's little micro-architectural issues that end up resulting from this, like cache lines that are not flushed when they should not be, or in the other case of Spectre, variant 2, which is the branch prediction tables being manipulated. And so Meltdown is purely, we're going to start executing some random instruction, read some memory, and not check the page table bits to make sure that like their normal user land process can access this. And this is part of the reason why KPTI for Linux and other mitigations have come out, which is basically removing the kernel mappings from user land in order to help prevent this issue from happening. Spectre is the one that is more difficult to deal with in the fact that it is intra-process, meaning that if you can find a bug in a little bit of code, you can actually read it out of memory. But in some ways, it's also a little bit more contained because that is also able to be addressed through things like ret pooling, which is a technique developed by Google, and then also identifying the various buffer gadgets that are used to exploit Spectre in order to basically put memory fences in order to prevent speculative execution. And so Spectre, to a certain degree, can be worked around with the compiler solution, whereas the Meltdown cannot. You guys want to add anything else?
No, you definitely covered, I think, the depth of the problem. The questions on my mind, I think, I'm just jumping in.
Yeah, go right ahead. That's what I want. Because
how the heck did they keep this under wraps for as long as they did? I think Google brought it to Intel's attention a year ago. Is that what I recall? And FreeBSD, the community was caught flat-footed, as I recall, right?
So yeah, so they first did the notifications June 1st. I actually talked with Mike Hamburg, and who actually talked with Paul Kocher, who is the primary author and listed author on both papers. And apparently this idea actually germinated even back in 2016. So it's been thought of, but a proof of concept I don't think happened until 2017. And the Meltdown was the one that Google discovered. And so there was notification done in June. But if you look at the mailing list, Linux kernel actually started putting patches, I think as early as October, if I remember, on helping. That was a little bit thing, but at least by November, there was some patch rumors going around about KPTI, and because of the Kaiser patch and stuff. FreeBSD only got notified because of the third party who uses FreeBSD got notification in December, and they're like, what? Has FreeBSD been notified? No, what are you guys talking about? And so there was a mad dash to get NDAs in place and other stuff. And so as I tweeted about it shortly before Christmas, FreeBSD finally got notification. FreeBSD head, it has actual patches, it has not been backported to 11. So pretty quick turnaround time for FreeBSD at least.
Yeah, so for those who haven't been, heads down in this world, this issue was discussed as a theoretical vulnerability. I've heard as far back as 95 that this was discussed as a theoretical vulnerability in papers.
I think Bruce Schneier even mentioned it.
Yeah,
in those days.
It was not proof of concepted until sometime in 2017, in early 2017, as a real thing that could be done.
Uh-huh. And
then in June of 2017, I keep reading it's 2018 already.
Yeah,
in June 2017, it was released to a small subset of OS vendors and hardware vendors, Intel, Microsoft, AMD, Linux, ARM, and maybe there were a couple others in there. Apparently now it was released to China, and which has just been in the news in the past day or so. But it was embargoed. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, basically, in order to prevent an issue from getting exploited while it's under repair, while it's being fixed by everybody and their brother, the security community, OS industry, has come up with the concept of an embargo. And so one of the very interesting aspects of this is that through the process of the patches being developed and applied to the systems who had access to the embargoed information,
everybody had separate dates.
Everybody had separate dates, but also through the process, specifically the Linux kernel, people were seeing weird patches getting applied to Linux with redacted comments. And so it became a sort of reverse engineering the fixes for people to figure out what the vulnerability was, and that was figured out prior to the actual embargo end date by someone. I don't remember who broke that news, but it hit the media very quickly, and they actually ended up having to push up the embargo end date a couple days. It was supposed to be released on January 9th, and I think they released it on January 7th.
Actually, I think it was the 3rd.
3rd?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it was 2 days after New Year's, I remember.
But it was the 3rd that the embargo was finally lifted. Register broke it, and the original date for release was June 9th, and there was actually interesting speculation because June 9th was the day after Intel was supposed to do the keynote for CES, which is interesting timing.
Coincidence? I think not.
Timing is everything.
Yeah.
So, for me, the embargo brings up, the concept of the embargo is a really interesting discussion point. I know John Mark has opinions, but I'd like to hear, just opinions on the concept of the embargo from Mike and Bill here.
On the embargo, they are necessary activities. As any of you that have followed any releases of information for vulnerabilities have been identified, and as they release those patches, threat actors will immediately start looking to see how they can proliferate and take control of systems based on the knowledge that comes out now. If this had been released straight up, they still don't have working patches. There's no telling what some threat actor may have gotten to at this point to exploit given CPUs. My background real heavily is risk analysis on there, and that's where I address this from as an overall risk aspect. This is a bad thing. The embargoes are necessary to keep that risk minimized while the vendors are developing fixes, especially of ones that are of this significant nature.
So
Related to that question.
I'm gonna have you talk to the mic, because otherwise
Oh, okay.
John Mark can't hear you. But I got to turn it on.
Okay.
There's too many buttons here.
No worries.
Are you getting the right one?
What's the number?
4.
Hello? Yeah, related to that question is, what are your thoughts in terms of how much information you disclose at the time of the embargo ending? In terms of, do you keep it pretty high level, or do you make it informed so that defenders can defend appropriately, or do you keep it general so that attackers have to work harder?
That's a dual-edged sword. You want to make sure that the people that are defending have the adequate amount of information that they need to be able to supply it. It could be that you may have a separate channel open for them to contact the vendor back. It's always a touchy item, and usually whenever they lift those embargoes, they are comfortable releasing a fair amount of information for the defenders to be able to move forward with, knowing that the threat actors, the opponents, are going to take that information and start moving forward with it. So it is a risk-based decision that they make of how much information to release when that embargo is lifted, so that people are able to move forward to implement the fixes.
I don't disagree with the points that you made, except from what I've seen, it gives the wrong people an edge, is what I've seen. And most of the attackers, honestly, the problems that most organizations are faced is basic blocking and tackling. So, like for instance, in this example, most of the people that I work with, they're concerned about this, but this is kind of a longer term concern. There are so many other issues that they have. My concern is that, much like insider trading, kind of the same models apply here, right? We're giving advantages to nation states and people that have vast amounts of resources. They're kind of looped in on what's going on here, and then the rest of the community is kind of left high and dry. So personally, I'm not a fan of the embargoes. I never believe that anybody can keep a secret if there's more than one person involved.
And so that that sort of ties right into the question I was going to ask, which is, if there's going to be an embargo, who should be included, and how long should that embargo be? I mean, I know there's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
But I know from talking with John Mark that a lot of people feel that it was not widely enough disseminated. The information was not widely enough disseminated. But how do you draw that line? And I'm going to let John Mark answer.
Yeah, no, it's a really difficult thing, because as he said, you really need to limit and be able to provide patches for the people who are able to. In this case, and this is something that I've been talking about, is that it's also very dangerous to exclude certain people, because when you have an especially long embargo like this, 6 months, that is 6 months of time that some people get to develop fixes, and then the people who get excluded don't get to, and actually that turns into more of a year behind for the people, because that's 6 months of additional time before the new people get caught up to where the old people is. And so it's, for something like this, I actually think a staged disclosure would have been better, where they were like, okay, we've notified our partners, we're going to set a general release for 6 months later. We have most of the things done after 3 or 4 months. Now we're going to actually start reading into these other people, which is clearly what Intel did. But the fact that they did not include all of the other operating systems and some of the more third-tier cloud providers like DigitalOcean, Joyent, the BSDs, Illumos, SmartOS, really shows that there is limits of what they decided as a risk, and only the big three. So I do think embargoes to a certain extent serve a good purpose, but the problem is that you end up causing more headaches for others, and not providing a level playing field. So.
And there may be some changes on how this activity occurs on embargoes going forward, because there are 4 congressmen that are calling for more information on how this embargo was put in place, who the players were, how they went about doing that. So there may end up being, some, whether we like it or not, some regulatory aspects that may fall out of this. That's to be seen at this point.
Oh, goody, the government's going to get it.
Oh yeah, our tax dollars at work.
So, going from the conversation about the embargo putting some organizations, 6 months behind in fixing, and this is more of a personal curiosity, were there things you could learn from the fixes that, say, Linux had put in? Were there things that FreeBSD, OpenBSD, other operating systems were able to learn from the one group who had remediated it in an open source fashion?
Good question. Because Windows is already rolling back again, right? I mean,
yeah, Windows can't seem to get their patches right.
Well, they've got the option now. You can turn it off, turn it on.
Yeah.
I saw that today, where you can go in and edit the registry, and there's some items there because of timing on there. You got the guys with the silicone that were supposed to have some level of the microcode and the silicone fixes available for the operating systems to be able to be layered upon, and there's a disconnect in that patch activity. Again, timing.
Yeah, the Meltdown patch was actually, in many ways, the very easy one, because of the simple fact that it was speculative execution across page permission boundaries. And as soon as I heard that, I don't remember if it was because I was influenced by KPTI or I came up with it myself, but it was like clearly the easy way to do it. People have been doing the optimization of actually having userland and kernel mapped into the same address space in order to make copies much faster and other stuff, but there was no need for it to happen. It was just cheaper that way, and so it was very easy to do the very initial mitigation of not having kernel mapped into userland for Meltdown. Spectre, on the other hand, is much more difficult and not as straightforward. But at the same time, the various compiler people have done a decent job of trying to address the Spectre issues.
John, Mark, could you address the 2 variants on the Spectre, because there are actually 2 variants of the Spectre vulnerability?
Yeah, so the 2 variants on Spectre, the very first one is a simple buffer overflow. It's not really a buffer overflow, but the common thing is that you have a variable and you check the array length, and if the array length is within the size, then you actually do a memory access. If you're, but the thing is that, so what you do is you prime that such that you always do requests within the array length, and then what happens is then you do a request that is outside the array length, and because the processor was trained to always predict that you're within the array, it will now go beyond the array and access this memory, and then it's a little bit more complicated, because it's basically using that array bounds to access another array, but by doing that, you now can actually perturb the cache based upon that data that should not have been read. And so that is the variant 1 of Spectre. The second variant of Spectre is a branch prediction table, and doing that primed incorrectly, so that when indirect branch, and this is commonly used for things like C++ virtual function, virtual classes and that like, and that one actually goes beyond, it's a little bit more complicated, because you prime the indirect jumps to do basically like a return-oriented programming in order to access data. And then once you have that data access, those instructions executed, you then can look at the cache data that was perturbed based upon data that you should not have been able to read. So it's kind of hard to describe on the video conference. So.
Thank you. from a risk, again, one of the items. How many of you are familiar with the National Vulnerabilities Database or the Common Vulnerabilities and Exploits Information, the CVSS scoring system? All three of these variants have separate CVE numbers. All three of them score a 5.6 score rating, which is a medium risk on there. So they are not a high risk vulnerability or a critical risk. One of the aspects of that causes that is that, with the exception of one of the variants, you have to be local to install software and run that software. The one variant of Spectre has to do with process and site isolation, and all of the current web browser manufacturers have deployed updated browsers that will take care of that particular item. That stems from you going to a malicious website, running some malicious JavaScript that initiates that cross-site or cross-process inquiry and data reading, where the different processes are able to see each other and pull data from them. So the browser manufacturers have deployed updated browsers over the past week and a half.
Now, who has confidence that they're going to be able to prevent consistently?
Or who has confidence that they're going to be able to install those updated browsers in their enterprise environment?
Yeah,
Right.
That's always one of the things. It boils down to resources. Can you get them deployed out quickly?
I personally think that it's a given that stuff's going to get on there locally, and we need to start thinking about detection and response.
Yeah.
Prevention, I think, is probably unlikely to be successful most of the time.
Yeah. Increased monitoring is going to be one of the items. Are you seeing anything? And one of the bad things with these particular vulnerabilities is they're not. You don't see them in the logs. On there, they are. If they're executed, you don't see that actually occurring. That it gets fed out to a log anywhere, to an analyze, or to a SIM solution, or anything to be able to trigger these out. So you're having to look for other traffic that may be going out, from an exfiltration standpoint. That as they're getting this, then they're back channeling it out over a network link to someplace on there. So it is, the additional monitoring is one of the big items that most of the folks are identifying to be, to try and put in place to help watch for that odd traffic.
Right. I think we're going to have to move the zero trust model from the network into the OS now.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, most
Microsegment my CPU and memory.
They're expecting this to just be tip of the iceberg for hardware vulnerability exploitations.
I think I saw somebody start to raise their hand over there.
I have a little question. You mentioned Windows patches.
Sorry.
Is it on?
Yeah.
What's the opinion on Windows patches being deployed to your customers? We kind of had an internal debate.
Still are.
Yes, on whether or not we should deploy the patches. We have done some testing, but know that we would have thousands of customers.
I think based on what we've already seen, that it's going to have to be a very cautious, rigorous period of time with testing like we've never seen before. I mean, there's already been a number of rollbacks. I could not, tell somebody that they should roll this out, with a straight face. I just don't see how you could assure people that their systems are not going to be impacted by rolling out patches.
There's been several reports, in particular, and I don't know if it's still the case, but in particular the reports I saw earlier last week were there were pretty explicitly things going bad on AMD level processors.
Right.
From the Spectre side on a lot of these patches, more so than the Intel. But there were reports of problems in the Intel world also.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I saw something saying that Intel had actually pulled some of their microcode updates.
Oh yeah, Friday they put that out.
Yeah, how many systems are going to end up getting bricked, right?
Yeah, that's been happening. I saw some stuff today talking about that.
Yeah. One of the things I find a little bit interesting and surprising, Intel also gave the mixed release when they first announced, things like, oh, actually, it's not a problem. Everybody has this problem, and so And then, of course, a day or two later, they're like, "Oh, actually, by the way, we have."
And then I woke up from my nap.
It's working as designed.
We're going to go take it, everybody wants some of that.
And nobody can modify your data. That's perfectly good, but everybody can read it.
Everybody can read it.
So one of the things that I'm surprised though is that I would expect companies like Intel and Microsoft are so large that the only thing that I can think of is that they must not have actually deployed their own patches to their internal organizations. Because if they were actually having as many failures as we're seeing in the wild, they would have failures on their local machine. And they probably did the selfish thing which said, I'm not going to deploy these patches because they're too risky and we're on a trusted system, so we don't need to deploy it. But the problem is that if you're not dogfooding your own stuff, you end up in a situation exactly like this. And to me, that's the only explanation that I can come up with, is that they chose not to dogfood their own patches and, making the general public pay.
So that actually kind of ties in nicely to one of the questions I was going to ask, which is I came into work logged on to work on, I think it was the 8th, to the company I'm contracted to, who has a ton of Microsoft Azure instances running all their applications, which had conveniently been rebooted the night before because they'd been warned they were going to do reboots sometime overnight, in a certain time window, and they let us know. Well, as soon as the issue got broken by the register, they pushed those reboots up and didn't bother to inform any of their customers. And so our company's application was down for half a day, probably, because it has a lot of big ugly data stores that are on Azure, and took a while to get them rebuilt from the reboot. So my question to the three of you was, do you feel like that was prudent on Microsoft's behalf, or was that reckless?
Without notifying the customer?
I mean, I think there was a notification email that went out an hour before or something like that.
Please.
It was ridiculous.
That was irresponsible.
I don't see how you could say it's anything other than reckless. Maybe the answer is everybody needs to go to microservices, right? And then it doesn't matter because all of the data is ephemeral. I don't know how fast that'll happen.
I'm not sure those microservices work like you think they work, though.
Still don't have that processor operating right.
It was just a
I like the thought, though.
I mean, we had that brief little discussion, and yet to a certain degree, yes, it is irresponsible, but at the same time, because of the variant 2 being able to be exploited across hypervisors, which is one thing that I did mention earlier and is very important, is the fact that variant 2, you can actually extract data from other virtual machines. There is actually significant risk, which is another reason why I was the third tier cloud provider should have been notified. But it really comes down to, at the same time, it sounds like Azure did not actually do a very well staggered availability zone restart either, in that they basically said, okay, all of our availability zones, let's start rebooting them, as opposed to reboot one availability zone, wait 5-10 hours for things to stabilize, and then move on, such that people who had well architected their systems would be able to be recovered. And so it does sound, I don't know the full thing because I'm not aware of everything that Azure did, but it does sound like there was some people were not as well architected to handle an availability zone outage as others were, though, too. So
I suspect the leg that they have to stand on is that you're paying for a service from Microsoft, so that it's their right to do what they need to. On the other hand, this is not news, I don't think, but the bigger question is, this is terrible news in the enterprise, right? That potentially you can read this memory, but in Azure and AWS and Google and every other cloud computer, all you have to do is establish an instance.
Every one of these
right,
also.
in one of those organizations, and if you get lucky next to somebody that you would like to know what's going on in their systems, this is a great opportunity if you can run the code on there. Right, so what's going to be the response, in the cloud? How are we going to deal with all of the instances that are already running, in the cloud today, and how are we going to detect and respond to these threats? That's probably the bigger question to me than even the enterprise right now.
I realize the cloud is becoming ubiquitous, but has anybody talked to anybody who's reconsidering use of the cloud?
I have
because
not.
of these issues?
Everybody's moving ahead. And in fact, I would say even in the enterprise, I haven't seen as much concern, I would say, as things in the past. It seems like, I think I mentioned to you, I was like, maybe we all just have security fatigue right now, because there's just been so much. Mm-hmm. And I've also heard the compelling argument that, well, yeah, this is bad, obviously, but there's so many other things that are more likely to happen that, this doesn't even make the top 10 right now.
So some of the things like I brought up, because, the aspect of having to be local, puts it on there versus, somebody doing a phishing campaign for ransomware, is got a lot, it's a lot higher priority for a lot of security professionals right now to keep those, those type of threats from getting in that are remotely able to remotely access systems. So it does make a difference on, the prioritization of what is the risk.
But if I were in an operational role today and being pressured to deploy these, would I today? I would probably push back and present the facts, what the risks are, how the likelihood, and say that we're just going to have to take a longer wait and see how this plays out, because most organizations are not going to have the people and resources to properly, test this. Especially when you see Microsoft and Intel not even doing the basic testing.
Yeah.
That also pushes you in February, because the way they roll everything up now, you're now looking not at January, it's
Yeah.
rolling into the next month and the next month.
They have pushed some out of cycle items. The browser for IE and for and Edge
Yes.
browsers were out of cycle pushes for Microsoft on those items on there. So there are some of those things occurring, as deemed necessary by that company.
They'll just have to block JavaScript, right?
Everywhere.
The internet works so well without that these days.
Yeah, no, it was the JavaScript is a very interesting thing because it also I don't want to derail our conversation too much, but it has actually renewed the discussion about ads and Google's and failing to vet that, and the fact that there's been a whole resurgence of cryptocurrency mining ads out there. So it's
That was predictable.
It turns out letting anonymous third parties run code on your browser is not such a good thing.
One of the other areas to kind of address while we're on the topic is, everybody's probably seen the aspect of performance hits. How hard, are the systems going to be hit from a performance standpoint? And I've seen numbers range anywhere from 5% to 30% impact. Whenever you boil that down, there's going to be, depending upon what actually occurs in that, because I've heard some people they've seen actual 5%, some people have said they've noticed no impact. It's going to be, to a large extent, what the load is of your applications running in either in your own data center or in cloud environments. One of the items you're going to have is dollars. It's going to boil down to dollars on that impact of unbudgeted performance resources necessary to now accommodate that additional load that the processor used to be able to go 100 miles an hour. The patches, once they finally get them out there, okay, now it's going to go 90 miles an hour. Well, your performance load may, from a capacity need, maybe you needed that processor to be running at 100 to, for your application to run properly, or wherever you've got seasonal loads, things of that nature. Now you're going to have to bring additional compute resources online that were essentially unbudgeted. You're going to have to acquire those.
Well, one of the other things I've at least heard, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, at least for the meltdown fixes, a lot of it has to do with actually how a lot of the performance impact has to do with how your app actually runs and how much time it's been switching between kernel and user memory.
On the map, that mappings and everything.
Because it of the net result is that it can't read from memory as quickly in a lot of cases.
Right.
Yeah, because of the way they were mapping to help provide
Yeah.
that speed. Yes, that's going away.
Yeah, so the meltdown patch, there is, depending upon your workload, you'll see 5 to 30%. And if you're doing syscall heavy stuff where, like a standard web server is, you're going to see closer to 30%, if not more. If you're architecting and using really interesting technologies like DPDK or NetMap, where you're doing almost all of your workload in the user land, you won't even see any performance difference because you just won't. The good news, though, is that there is also a standard called a feature on a lot of modern processors called PCID, which is Process Context ID, which allows you to tag address spaces. And so when the patches are making use of that, it allows you to do the user-land to kernel context switch without having TLB, and so you should see a very minimal overhead, maybe like a 0.5% or so on the well-tuned patches once they're fully addressable. But the problem is that it takes a while to get all of those little bits worked out, as we have been seeing.
Yeah. And one of the other things I saw that there is going to be an impact for compiler vendors is apparently there's going to be a new set of flags and controls for vendors to be able to use in their compilers to help with this, and essentially all applications are going to have to be recompiled with updated flags.
And what's this going to do to my SSL decrypt?
Good question.
It was already a big problem trying to figure out how much CPU you needed.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the things that it's kind of nice to have brought this out with Meltdown and Spectre, is the fact that we've been living on, in my opinion, technical debt for all the lack of security that we've done over the years. And so the fact that we were getting the performances that we were already is purely luck because of the fact that we've had this technical debt. And so to a certain degree, people complaining about, oh my God, I have to pay all this unplanned CPU. Yes, you do, but just think about the last basically 17 years, you didn't have to pay. You were basically getting the interest on having to buy all that CPU, and so you need to, in my opinion, we really need to work a lot more on getting security to the forefront, and no longer where price and performance is the key components. It's going to be very expensive, but we have a $100 billion cybersecurity industry built on technical debt. So.
Well, so you just teed up my next question perfectly. Thank you. So to bring this around to kind of the OWASP side of things, what can the software security community do to help mitigate issues like this, and even more so in the future to help prevent them from being as onerous to fix? Is there anything, or do we just throw up our hands and go?
Well, at the hardware layer, it's difficult at best because it is, there's a big piece of this is actually in the silicon on there, and so a big driver of this was lack of security planning in the development of the processors. As was stated, we've got that technical debt. Okay, every year processors got bigger, they got badder, they got faster, and that was the thing. And all of a sudden, the bubble has burst, where all right, in the silicon level, there are process faults that occurred because the proper encoding of the silicon was not done with security in mind. The operating system vendors from that software development activity are putting pieces in place to help mitigate the fault at that next lower level. But from a, and Bill, you cover this, if you see anything out of kilter on this, there's not a huge amount that the normal software developer can do other than continue to follow secure coding standards, to make sure that they're protecting their piece of the island that they are able to protect, and watching whenever updates come out that pertain to this type of activity of, okay, what, are there aspects that somebody else has found that, hey, we can encode this in here to help offset that. But from where things are at this point in time, there's not much.
I just keep thinking back to the cathedral and the bazaar, right? I mean, it seems like this problem keeps coming back, different iterations. When was that book written? What was it, like 97 or 98, I'm thinking, right? Right? Do you build this grand cathedral with this limited number of people and resources and not have any oversight, or have it out in the open source community, to simplify it. It seems like we got bit in the butt by relying on these process developers, Intel and AMD, doing things proprietary without a whole lot of exposure to how they were doing it. Do you disagree?
Well, and so I mean
how do you abstract that?
The cynic in me sort of wonders if have we started doing our development with too many layers of abstraction underneath? Do we need to go back to coding in x86 assembler? Not that I want to do that, but
nobody's identified any hardware vulnerabilities in those at this point.
That's
I would say, see, we told you so. Should have not left the mainframe.
Actually, I think I saw a patch for Linux on the mainframe that came out the other day.
Yeah. But that was just for an LPAR, right?
No, in all honesty, I mean, do we rely too much on hardware performance improvements that could be done in software that could be, by writing better code, by writing faster code, are we relying too much on those processors being fast and sloppy?
Well, you get the sloppy aspect from just the reduced price of RAM anymore.
Right.
One of the first systems that I worked with when I was in the military, it ran in 64K of RAM on there, and it
640K should be enough for anybody.
And it handled the entire battalion field artillery. But you get more and more items. This faster GUI interface and more features for this and more features for that. The price of RAM goes down. They get it in there, and kind of a byproduct, be it right, wrong, or indifferent, is a lack of enforced coding standards to optimize, and those.
It's cheaper to throw fast hardware at bad code.
Yeah.
Sure is.
Yeah, the layers of abstraction are the real problem. The layers provide the ability for us to do the really fast coding. It allows us to use terribly inefficient languages like Ruby and Python to do to be able to move very quickly. But the problem is that we pay for that. I mean, even Facebook, as they saw when they started out using PHP, and as they grew, they literally could not actually handle how terrible PHP performance. It's not that bad, but when we grew as big as Facebook, it was bad enough that they went their own way on stuff. And so, the web is yet another layer of abstraction. Actually, it's about like 20 or 30 different layers that is part of the reason why Chrome is using like a gig of RAM and other stuff. And so it's provable that you can do very impressive things with limited resources. Even though I don't like to use this as an example, but the JVM, with all the JIT technology and other stuff, they've done very interesting things. When you throw 1,000+ engineers you can actually get pretty decent performance and other stuff out of that, and Microsoft's done something very similar with the CLR, common, their little runtime environment like JVM. So it does demonstrate that when you put technology, you can do very impressive stuff, but we need to do, in my opinion, do better sharing the open source so that people can make use of the technologies that are faster and make them more secure to improve this side of things.
Hard to disagree.
So does that mean, and I'm kind of opening this question up to anybody in the room, should code performance be something that the security industry is interested in, the OWASP community, the software security community? Should code performance and code quality take a higher priority than it does today?
As a security professional, yes.
Because that's something that I never hear talked about at an AppSec conference.
The problem is though that the language of business isn't security or ops or application. It's money.
Yeah.
Yep, profit.
Okay?
Yep.
And all of this is great in theory, but if you run your cost with an extra 1,000 engineers to the point you're broke, you're not in business anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's always a balancing act of the business operations and the security requirements, being able to balance what has to be done there so that the business is able to operate as quickly as they need to, and you get an acceptable level of security and risk reduction in place, for them to be able to move forward. I like the term I use that I use is you help them make sure that they are securely successful. And it's one of those things that the only reason the security shop's there is because the business is operating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so the interesting thing is, I remember coding 20 years ago, and there, as a library, the question was, do I add this check or not? Because is a null pointer check, is this too expensive to add in a library? Oh, I always know that the person who calls me is smart enough not to add a null pointer. And back 30 years ago, they were actually very expensive, both in code size and CPU cycles. But as CPU cycles got free, we got to the point where we said, oh, those null pointer checks, it is much better to always include them than it was to not include them from a robustness perspective and other stuff. And so we have changed our practices. And so there's a lot of things that we can do with, so to say, our free cycles, adding null pointer checks and other stuff to overall improve things. And something like concerted efforts to improve performance can be done. I worked with Netflix on their Open Connect appliance, which they use to deliver a majority of the content. And there was the big, we worked on a project to move TLS into the kernel in order to get performance. And they're now at something like a single socket box being able to push 90 gigabit per second TLS encrypted net traffic, which, if people thought about this even just 5 years ago,
That's
people would be
astonishing.
blown off the way. So there can be concerted efforts and engineered solutions in order to make it such that security is not a performance impact on that. But the problem is it does cost money, and a lot of companies just aren't willing to spend that money to make that engineering effort.
Yeah. And it may be that you have to potentially look at that to be spread over a period of time. You may not be able to do everything, right now and put that whole chunk out. You have to look at it from a long-term standpoint of what can you put in place and make a continual improvement process occur.
Question?
Do you think Intel uses Chaos Monkey?
Oh, well, yeah, there's also Chaos Monkey, which is another, they've done a lot of very, very nifty things to improve reliability like the Chaos Monkey. It's very good.
So, back to the comment about open source. Is the idea of an open source CPU feasible?
Only Elon Musk could answer that.
Well, it's always one of those things, what's business all about?
I mean, I know Linus failed, but
Yeah, that's right. He tried.
It might be difficult to get somebody to invest $1 billion in a fab shop for open source.
Well, yeah. There's the idea of production, which is an almost entirely separate discussion, but simply the design.
Right.
Or are we forever going to be beholden to the Intels and AMDs of the world?
I mean,
Is it?
ARM doesn't do production, do they? Right? So
Yeah, they're just a design consortium.
Yeah.
the model of ARM, except for open source, is something that I feel like that's not crazy, but I don't know.
But even ARM got caught up in this.
Yeah,
right?
they actually have processors, ARM processors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mobile devices have a lot of ARM processors, IoT.
Thankfully, my
things,
small herd of
a
Raspberry
lot of ARM
Pis is
processors
fine.
out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those aspects from a business standpoint. One of the leading items for any business is their proprietary knowledge of how they develop and build a product, and it's always one of those things that do you stifle a business aspect potentially by trying to move a hardware item into an open source environment? I mean, it's a very good question. Don't know the answer. Because there's pluses and minuses to both viewpoints of that.
So, having done a little bit of, my specialty is not hardware engineering, but I've worked with a number of companies over the years. Is the cost is just too great to do a truly good open source processor. Like Sun actually did an OpenSpark processor. I don't remember of anybody actually delivering silicon based upon that, but they did open up the one of their designs. And then also there's the RISC-V processor, which is also an open platform that is definitely more for research. And I believe there's a RISC-V processor actually in silicon coming out, if not out already this year. So
all those
there are
OS2 users are laughing at us.
We're just not going to ever see the performance close to what Intel does, because they literally have like tens of thousands of engineers, and the verification costs are just astronomical in order to verify a processor. I've talked to people, and literally within about a few minutes to an hour of receiving silicon, they have run more clock cycles than the last 3 years of simulation and verification that they have. And the CPU farms that they have for verification is just not going to happen in the open source world.
On a side note, this topic got me thinking the other day, because I've been reading almost the same period of time when all this was happening about the developments and progress in quantum computing, right? And quantum computing is going to usher in a world where there really are no secrets. Whoever has the power of quantum computing is going to be able to pretty much decrypt anything, right? Now, this will probably lead to an arms race, develop new methods with quantum computing to protect, right? But for a period of time, there are going to be people that have the power to basically, compute and read just about anything they want. So I was just kind of thinking, is this a prelude, to where we're heading with this type of vulnerability?
Because I'm sure the folks that are working on that technology, based on this, are probably digging deep into, do they have similar, within their hardware, do they have similar vulnerabilities?
So, I mean, what do you guys think the takeaway is for computer security people from these issues? I mean, what thing sticks in your head most from the whole situation around these issues? Maybe not just the issues themselves, but the whole situation around them.
Well, I guess I'll circle back to where I kind of started, which was, and I don't think I'm alone on this, but detection and response is going to be has to be the focal point. Prevention seems like a joke, right? There's so many ways. I had a discussion today where somebody was trying to come up with a better mousetrap to protect their infrastructure. And I was like, I could probably sit here and come up with 500 ways that I could get in here, and there are people way better at this than me. So I think we need to focus our efforts someplace else rather than betting the bank on preventing access to the system. You know.
Yeah, I definitely concur with that, and I've seen a lot of articles where a lot of the industry is moving that same direction. Is you know, the big push is having incident response plans, monitoring, logging, looking and hunting for, you know, the things that are not right in your environment. You know, being able to baseline what your standard is, looking for the anomalies, and being able to rapidly respond to those and correct it. Instead of expending a lot of money, they finally decided across the board that, you know, like Bill said, the prevention side of it, it's a sinkhole for money to go into, and it's finally coming around where the response, you know, detection and response are where they're going to come out better.
Yeah, the real question is how effective are the EDR players going to be at detecting things, you know, that change, you know, in memory, you know, and being able to identify, you know, what that event looks like. Is it even attainable?
Yeah, what I would say one of the big things that, and especially us at New Context has been pushing this, is automation and being able to deploy your patches. The number one problem is people are still, there's a number of cases where people, you know, they have a year-old patch that they haven't applied because they don't have a test infrastructure set up properly. They don't have deployment and being able to treat your computers like cattle as opposed to your pets, you know, and little things like that. And so, and the fact that, you know, Intel, and coming back to what I said earlier, Intel and Microsoft did dog food and test their own patches before releasing it on the public, you know. And so it really goes to show that you need to be able to have automation. And this brings me, I was recently reading a really interesting article about the shipping company Maersk, I think it was. They got hit by NotPetya, and literally it was like 10 days they rebuilt over 40,000 computers with support. And I would love to see what their DR plan was to be able to actually rip up that many servers and rebuild in order to deal with that. And that actually is a testament to a very, in my opinion, a well-developed information security team.
I agree. I saw that also, and I was curious if I knew anybody that knew anybody.
What trucking company is this?
Maersk. They're a logistics shipping container company worldwide.
Huge.
They're enormous.
A movie made about them.
Really?
And the just actually the interesting part about that story was they only suffered something like a 4.9% volume decrease or something when they went to full manual during their 10-day reboot, which is both amazing but also worrisome though, because in the future when we go full automation where you cannot actually go manual, then there will be, you know, the volume will go to zero, and that is a big problem, which just goes to show that you really need to have a very good DR problem to be able to recover and patch these systems very quickly.
And those need to be tested. You know, that's a big piece for any continuity planning and disaster recovery aspects is the testing on there to make sure that what you think is going to happen, you can get it to happen.
Right. But I think this will highlight, right, the thing that people have not been doing well everywhere I go, is that, you know, going back to the zero trust model, you have to know what your critical data is, what your critical apps are, and what the flows are to that data, and understand that behavior. And you have to understand it very, very well. And it's very few companies that I've run into where they can even identify where their critical data is, let alone understand the complexities of the data flows between the apps. And that's absolutely got to happen, right? How can you even begin to recover, you know, if you don't even understand those basic things? I see it everywhere though.
Yeah, I recently remember hearing about a company that failed to renew a domain that was critical for their own thing because the IT department didn't even know about it, you know. And when you don't even know about this random domain that's key to your operations, how can you handle data flow and other stuff? So.
Right. But yeah, that gets back to basic blocking and tackling, right? I mean, you have to understand the basics in order to even begin to address this, because let's face it, nobody's going to be able, I mean, some of these large organizations are never going to have a shot at updating the microcode, you know, on the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of servers that are out there, right? So you're going to have to figure out what are the most critical assets and target those first. There's going to have to be prioritization, if and when we get to that point.
Yeah.
You guys talk about detection and response. As a developer for a small company, what options, what would I look for in the detection world? How would I, if I have my baseline of what I know what my traffic flow is supposed to be, what product, what should I be using for this detection?
Well, there are
a lot of choices.
Yeah, there actually are a lot of choices.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a company out there called Anomaly that provides a product that looks at, you know, and looks at the traffic flows, things of that nature, and is able to identify, you know, okay, where are the burps. A lot of the companies that are coming out now, if you look at the AI world, you know, the machine learning arena, that is going to be a big player in that area of incorporating that type of technology into having, for lack of a better term at this time, an overseer looking at how all your systems, and you have to look at it from a holistic view of how all of your systems interact with each other, and what is their normal flow, when does that flow occur, you know, user loads, things of that nature, and the folks like you and me just sitting down like, you know, the old style, oh, I'm going to look at this set of logs all day long, and you're going to burn your eyes out. And you have to, you know, the shortcoming in security folks to be able to help with that, you know, they're talking, what, 1.8 million shortfall by 2020 or 2022?
3.2 million.
Yeah, is it up to that now? Yeah. You know, you have to be able to provide that automation. In the coding itself, you may look at your parameters. What did you pass? Did the response come back from a valid responder, you know, by IP address, those type of things where you put, as Bill brought out several times, zero trust. You only accept that from those responses from who you expect to respond to, you know, that response to come from.
And even if we expect it to come from there, we try to code that we don't even trust them. We still check everything coming in.
Yeah, you validate, and especially whenever you look at things like within the arena where a lot of areas are going to single-page apps. A lot of that validation is done on the client side in the browser. If your server backend is not also doing that same validation of that data, you're leaving yourself open, you know, for a detection, you know, from something to be able to come back in.
Oh yeah, Google developer tools, you can go in and do you mean that field's disabled because, well here, let me just go in there and delete that line. Oh look, now it's enabled, and amazingly, I can submit something or do something.
Yep. Your bounds checking. Are you getting stuff that, you know, that fits within what's supposed to be the allowable deal? And then are you logging that out? If it's anomalous, hey, that doesn't belong. You know, are you doing a log out? And some of that aspect ties back in again to dollars. How much logging space do you need to acquire to be able to put that out on disk for a solution to be able to start analyzing? You know, so there are aspects just directly within the code that can be done to be able to log anomalies out, making sure you're doing your bounds checks, you're validating the data coming back, validating the leaks coming back from.
The one issue with Anomaly, though, is unless you're Bank of America, you're probably not going to have the bank for that threat intel platform, much like Palantir. But what I could think of off the top of my head, something more attainable for most companies, there's a organization / company called Perch, and basically they do a sensor with like an IDS, but with a community approach. So you can like take feeds from a lot of the ISACA, or not, what's the term I'm looking for? Not ISACA, my brain's, like FSISAC, right? Or FSISAC or Homeland Security's HSISAC. There's also a healthcare one. So there's finance, there's health, there's Homeland Security. Those are the three big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Anyhow, most of them, you can get the feeds for very little investment, and in some cases for free. And what's also interesting is you can also participate in a geographic neighborhood. So say for instance, you're a small credit union, right? You could be pooled in with other small credit unions in the area, right? And basically what happens is as fees come in to other people that are using this community network with Perch, it increases the odds of something being likely to be a problem, right? So instead of just a blind IDS signature match, it's this has also been matched by 5 other organizations in your area. So it gives you a little bit more substance, if you will. But yeah, Anomaly is an awesome threat and tell platform, but if you don't.
It does, their prices on a lot of them, and there are others though that are minimum. Alien Vault has a free feed from their item. FireEye has several free tools that are available that you can utilize in-house.
I think McAfee even has a feed too.
I believe you're right.
Okay, not as a future. As a non-security person.
Yeah.
I understand what feeds are.
Yeah.
What is a security feed that these softwares that you're referring to?
So it's basically taking a whole lot of other people's ways of fingerprinting and pattern matching, what we would call indicators of compromise, IOC sometimes.
IOC.
So if you have other security tools, sometimes you can take those IOCs, like they could be hashes or they could be other things, and you could plug them into your firewall or your endpoint solution and have better visibility.
There's some really great standards out there for sharing that kind of information too.
The backbone on that is Sticks and Taxi, right?
Yeah.
So kind of that information exchange between the communities and the vendors.
And if that's something we'd be interested in having at a separate meeting, I could probably.
Yeah, that could be a whole meeting in itself, Sticks and Taxi.
Oh, yeah.
I think John Mark and I know a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got your aspect of just your configuration control on the systems you're running on. There's the SCAP, which is a protocol, an open SCAP, which is a protocol where it's able to look and apply STIGs and oval definitions to how is that given system configured, and gives you recommendations that from a lot of other people what they do. Turn this off, remove this service out of that box completely to help harden that operating system layer or in some certain operating application layers from a configuration standpoint and a configuration management standpoint to additionally harden that to make it even harder for a threat actor to even find a hole to get in.
CIS is also a good source for things like what he's talking about, where there are these benchmarks for configuring routers, configuring OSs. It's a good starting point that a lot of people don't do.
And what Bill suggested, I don't know. I know you guys don't work directly for the credit unions, but since you are in the financial space, you may be able to get a membership to SAIC.
Yeah.
Which is a group, an information sharing group that
basically they have a database of relevant information on vulnerabilities and threats in the FSI.
So that might be a good thing to look at, because they have man lists, they send out alerts saying lots of people are seeing this issue and things like that, and so it's kind of a restricted access thing, but it's a great resource if you have somebody who can get that.
The guy that developed Perch did a lot of development on SAIC and Homeland Securities, and he realized that these were great databases of knowledge, but the problem was people would get these updates and then they'd go in and do all this manual work going through the databases. So that was why he came up with the idea of Perch. He was like, I'll have a IDS sensor and have those automatically plugged in, and that'll provide context. So now you don't have to sit there and go through the databases. That was his idea and thinking behind Perch.
mentioned SCAP and STIGs, you know, they have scanning, kind of using the NIST scanners and such, you know, unless you've been working with DoD, a lot of people are really kind of unfamiliar with the benefit of what that can give you.
Yeah.
And there are,
like
yeah.
we actually have moved it on to a different product, because we learned so much from scanning that we added to that and in different products and different types of scanning as well.
Yeah. And there are a lot of items that a lot of people don't realize is that the NIST special publications on there have a lot of good information. Yes, they were developed under the government's purview, but a lot of the information in there on those guidelines, their special publications as guidelines, are applicable to any industry. From a security standpoint, there's a special pub 800-128, which deals with secure configuration management. It's either 150 or 154 that deals with sharing threat intelligence information. The different levels of controls that can be put in place, the 800-53 document. So that's a good starting point, and they're free. To be able to take a look at and be able to look and say, is this applicable to us? And the company or an organization be able to go, yeah, that makes sense for us to use, or not, or be able to use that as a starting point to enhance their security posture within that. But those are available out there for anyone to be able to download, look through, make use of as they desire on there. So there's been a lot of money and a lot of good brain power that's been expended to bring those to the availability that they're at now.
And there's always paper and mimeographs too.
So,
if almost fails, where is my stone and chisel?
So I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask questions. If there's any other questions that they want to ask of our willing victims up here. But if we don't have a question, I have one more question which may send this off into a complete derail.
Do we want to stay for this?
But I'd like to hear opinions on it. So does anybody want to ask anything before I? Okay, so as I alluded to it earlier, but it was announced in the news in the past couple days that Intel notified some Chinese companies of these issues prior to lots of American companies. My question would be, is Intel, as a nominally American company, beholden to only share these vulnerabilities with American organizations? Or are they effectively a worldwide company and should be beholden just as much to large customers regardless of where they are?
Well, I think that goes back to what many people have said here, which is company's primary business is money.
I'll take this one. I've been thinking about this, and the way you framed your question actually changed my opinion, because as you really, Intel is nominally, Bay Area, Portland company. They have presence in Arizona and other stuff, but we always think of Intel. But in reality, companies are no longer the little companies that are supporting your mom and pop grocery store and other stuff. These big companies are international corporations, and they really do answer to their customers. So on that regard, yes, they were correct in notifying the Chinese companies. The difficulty with that correctness is the fact that it is highly likely that the Chinese companies did inform the government about the things. If you've read all the Chinese companies' denials, they are very wishy-washy. We did not release anything that was not public or whatever. All of their statements are very much like leave them plenty of wiggle room to have notified that. On the other hand, NSA had to say that they did not know about this, even though they were likely exploiting it for a very long time. And you know, the NSA has to say, yes, we were not notified until it went public, you know, and they have to say that they're not exploiting it. But I find that very hard to believe.
I find it fairly hard to believe that the three-letter agencies in general were not notified by Intel.
You can pretty well figure NSA intercepted the email between those organizations. They knew.
The real question is, how much time do you think there is before Intel is prevented from doing that as a national security position? Because I can tell you this, we already get involved with companies buying other companies' products, for instance, the telecom sector, right? There have been a number of deals that have been prevented because the backer of a certain chip maker is a Chinese national company.
Huawei something.
Yeah. I can tell you, I was approached years ago about taking a really nice security position within one of these companies. And I looked under the covers and I was like, oh, well, this deal's never going to go through anyhow because Sprint's going to be denied by the FCC as soon as they realize that there's a Chinese company involved in this. Sure enough, 2.5 years later, it got blocked. But yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised that there isn't already some sort of prevention as a national security interest.
And they've already got precedent. You look at Kaspersky. You know, there's been the ban essentially from, the Russian antivirus maker. And as of yet, be it right, wrong, or indifferent, there's been no proof provided that they actually were doing what the government said they were doing. So, you can probably expect a similar type deal to, if they can leverage it to make it happen, it will probably happen.
Here's a supposition for you, just a conspiracy theory.
Speak up so you can hear on that.
How about the government's the one who actually left vulnerability in the silicon so that they could exploit it?
There is that possibility.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those things that they are. It's possible.
It was just a joke.
But
but
the thing is though, with a lot of the stuff, you don't know.
That's right.
So this actually.
I'm taking out my Pentium processors today.
I think I've still got an AMD K2 somewhere.
I've got a couple of Motorola processors laying around.
There you go.
House.
We're at 16 now.
I got a Commodore 128 in my basement.
I think 20.
There you go.
So the reason I asked is that conversation had actually come up. I was watching the several weeks ago when Facebook and Twitter were testifying with Congress, and that concept got broached that there was because they were quote American companies, right? They were obligated to provide special disposition to the American government regarding security issues, and it was a point of curiosity as to what the general take on that was.
Yeah. And the other piece of that is okay, if they try to impose something like that, does that then set them up that Intel's not going to move to Switzerland?
Yeah, all
and then,
multinational corporations, they'll have multiple arms. Every one of them's got.
They'll all set up business on the Isle of
anyway,
Man.
just for taxes, right?
Yeah.
So
they'll just say, well, we're headquartered in the Isle of Man. Good luck, government.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. They
The
have enough
Antarctica.
cash reserves to be able to do that.
I think probably the Twitter bot thing may acquire more attention and notice though than the chip thing, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Depending upon what new vulnerabilities may pop out over the course of the year.
Yeah.
That could be still, to be seen.
Could you expand on that, since I don't do Twitter? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
So there's a big discussion right now on how to solve the issue of we've basically and not really that much news, I didn't think, when it happened, but other people are coming to the realization that it's very easy to set up accounts in Twitter and other services like it, and to simply say, hey, I've got 8 million followers. Well, how many of them are real, right? And that's influencing whose messages are getting out. and getting the most coverage, right? So you go out and buy all these Twitter bots, and basically you can create your own brand awareness and or message to the people. And so there's a lot of people talking about, well, we need to go to a real ID system where you have to have a real ID to get one of these accounts. Well, how's that going to affect people with that want to voice their problems with human rights and other issues, right? You know, so there's the anonymity versus real identity discussion happening.
Yeah, as Google found, the real ID concept is a great morass of messy stuff.
Yeah, it's great in theory.
Go ahead and
in
try and
reality,
enforce that.
yeah.
Who amongst you is going to submit your driver's license or this ID on Twitter? I'll just be like, yeah, I don't need Twitter.
Well, you can just submit it at the same time you submit your nude pictures to Facebook,
Right.
so they can make sure that those pictures aren't being
Yeah.
used by anybody.
Yeah.
So, I don't have any further questions on my list of things. If other people do have things they'd like to ask, or if anybody wants to interject something that they didn't get a chance to say during the rest of the meeting, I'm happy to hear it, but I don't have a ton more to talk about.
I would have one question. You guys are a lot closer to the industry, you know, there's a lot of people in here. What is the timeline that you're looking at before we're seeing patches that are less risky, potential microcode updates? I mean, I'm plugged into Intel pretty well, and they're still scary.
Yeah. You would probably have a better
I don't
idea of that
think-
than we would.
Yeah,
being
I don't
as
think
close to
anybody has
Intel.
any idea.
Yeah.
I would say here we are, in some cases over a year. Some people have known, have been theoretically working on this. But there is also this issue that I didn't touch on in the previous argument about, you know, the embargo situation, which is, you know, the other side of that is without this open discourse of these vulnerabilities, you know, how motivated are these people to solve these problems? And well, I don't work for Oracle anymore, so I'll go ahead and give you guys an example. When I was at Oracle, I got involved with a thread with the CISO.
Can I go post this to full disclosure, Bill?
Sure. I don't intend to go back there, so. Some of our...
Sign an NDA.
Nope, nothing's enforceable. So, you know, there were customers that were scanning the Oracle databases and submitting these vulnerabilities back to the vendor and saying, you know, what are you going to do to address these vulnerabilities? And the response was a little bit surprising to me, in that Oracle was going to enforce their rights per the DMCA, that they own the code, and you do not have the right to do vulnerability testing against that code. It's licensed, and you agreed to not tamper with that code in any shape or way or fashion. And Oracle does extensive security testing, and that should be good enough for you. I'm summarizing. It was actually about 2-3 pages long, but I did fall out of my chair, I think, when I read this. And I got interjected into the discussion and basically told the CISO that they needed to probably think about a better plan than that response. But eventually they recanted, but it was all over. I think that was like all over Dark Reading and a number of these other sites for about 4 or 5 days before they recanted it. And it was just a weird thing where the CISO didn't say anything, but some other spokesman did, and then it was never really talked about. But to my point, I got completely sidetracked. To my point, there was without that, you know, pressure to do something, you know, were they actually doing? I mean, Intel knew about this forever, and they still don't have anything close to a solution. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's intractable.
It's a very good possibility. It may not be truly fixed until the next gen of processors are developed that actually, you know, have true security processes, development aspects built into the flow of coming up with the next generation of processors.
Which raises another point. I think I read that the next 2 generations of processors designed have this same problem, and they have no intention of fixing. Didn't I read that?
Yeah, they're already in the cycle. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're not gonna, well, it depends upon your definition of truly secure, but we're not gonna see really even meaningfully secure processors in like the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
But dealing with Spectre and Meltdown, before we actually see true meaningful processors on the market, will be minimum 3, if not 5 years, just to do true mitigation, simply because of the architecture differences and other stuff. I can think of a few things where we might be able to see something out in 18 months if they're really lucky and decide to put engineering fast track behind it, such as actually having a separate set of caches for speculative execution that don't get committed to the main caches and things like that. And that could possibly be added with minimal thing, but you still have to go through massive validation and stuff. So it's going to be a while before there are true hardware mitigations for Spectre.
And the clock is running. Threat actors are aware of it now, and you can count on it. Nation states, individuals, script kiddies, they're going to be looking to see how they can bust it. They're going to be looking to see how they can potentially get into the systems, even though they say right now you have to have local access to it. They're going to be trying to figure out, how can I do that? And it's, stuff that I've run on test. Go drop a bunch of USB sticks around a facility somewhere, get somebody to pop one of those open and stick it in their box, see what it was. One of the big things people look for is, layoff notes. You tag them. Payroll. Stuff like that. People's curiosity will get the better of them. And they will go, it's not for me, but I want to see what this is. And a malicious piece of software that could input itself into a system that, eventually could end up with some aspect to be able to go out to a command and control server and start running these vulnerabilities and exploiting those vulnerabilities in the processor remotely then. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a lot of times people, the classic line is attacks only get better over time. The things that you thought were not attackable become attackable.
Yeah.
Rowhammer originally was thought not to be attackable, and then a Linux proof of concept came out. And oh, by the way, you can even exploit it under JavaScript and stuff. And so, another classic one is there was a timing attack against a password, and at first it thought that people thought that the timing attack was not possible remotely because there would be too much jitter on the network. But it turns out that timing attacks like these, just adding random noise, just means that you have to take more samples. It does not eliminate the risk. The side channel is really measured in bits per second, how quickly you can extract that data. And so
it's just a different application of Enigma, right? The World War II stealing of the cipher codes, right?
That was a little bit different. That wasn't a timing attack. There was other coordinated attacks like bombing a lighthouse in the middle of the nowhere because the lighthouse was a very long word and made it very easy to search the ciphertext for and stuff. But differential power analysis and other attacks are able to use to smooth out that noise and take timing channels that were previously thought to be unattackable and be exposed through those methods. And so the problem is only going to get worse and more attackable as time goes on, until we actually put in true mitigations in there, not just doing things like decreasing the timing resolution and other stuff. So.
People used to think you could never break an air-gapped system, and they've proven that wrong.
Yeah. Mr. Van Eck. All right. Well, thank you, all three of you, so much for taking your time to do this. This was very